Welcome to our 5 on 5. Please be joined in studio today by Senator Ron Wyden. Senator, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me again.
So this month we've seen President Biden and now Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders here in Oregon stumping for Tina Kotek in advance of the election. Midterms tend to favor the party that's not in power, currently Republicans. How concerned are you in advance of the election?
Well, what you're seeing with the campaigns is they're rallying supporters and allies and of course trying to reach out on the big economic messages, which in my view are all about cutting costs and addressing inflation. For example, on prescription drugs, I was just in Grants Pass this morning talking about prescription drug costs for our veterans. You know, we ought to at least say that our veterans are protected, and yet the big insurance companies, the big PBMs now are once again trying to make it harder for them to get affordable medicine.
So you're on the Senate Finance Committee. What is being done in that committee to change that?
We have already begun to implement some big changes. For example, my anti-price gouging legislation actually went into effect on October 1st. For the first time, the federal government would say if these big pharmaceutical companies raise the prices more than inflation, they would actually have to pay penalties. Next year, we start negotiating for the most expensive drugs to get lower prices, cancer drugs, arthritis drugs, and finally, we lifted this horrendous restriction that kept Medicare from bargaining.
The Fed has raised rates, taken multiple steps to curb inflation. How do we fix this?
I'm looking at a variety of different approaches, but I think the Fed should be considering a pause in these interest rate hikes. I think, and we're looking at a variety of approaches, but somewhere in the vicinity of a 90-day pause strikes me as sensible. There have been a number of interest rate hikes recently. Let's see what those proposals meant for the economy. And I think given the crunch in housing and all of the extra costs that our consumers are faced with, I think we ought to be looking at a pause in these interest rate hikes.
What issue or issues are people not talking about in the run-up to this election that you think should be discussed more?
Well, I would like to see more focus on these oil company monopolies. I've introduced a proposal that really puts in place some very dramatic tax changes. And it really comes down to a question of whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the mom who's trying to afford gas to take her child to child care, as I saw here in Jackson County this morning? Or are you on the side of these big tax breaks going to the oil company executives in the form of buybacks? And I'd like to see more specific discussion about what's being done to hold down gas prices.
We're going to take a quick break. We'll have much more with Senator Wyden in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to our 5 on 5. Again, we're here with Senator Ron Wyden. Senator, Oregon is the first state to earn federal approval for Medicaid reimbursement of mobile crisis intervention services like the CAHOOTS program in Eugene. How soon before we can see similar programs statewide?
It's under the law that I wrote that was passed in 2021. I consider it one of the most important measures I've been involved in because it brings together for the first time mental health folks and law enforcement people to deal with these difficult situations on the street. And what I heard over the last year or two is the law enforcement people say, look, we want to work on mental health issues. We're not trained for it. And the mental health people said the same thing about law enforcement. And my sense is that there's going to be a significant number of Oregon counties that are going to be, whoever is the next governor, being in contact with the state to use the Medicaid money that would be available for these programs that bring together mental health and law enforcement folks in their counties.
It's been a few weeks since you announced a hold on the nominee for U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia. Why?
The fact is that when you look at our relationship with the Saudis, they always seem to be getting more and more, and we get less and less. And I'm tired of our getting the short end of the stick. And I think that in terms of their diplomatic privileges, we ought to be looking at pulling some of those if they're going to continue these kind of efforts where they get together with the Russians and cut oil production, hurt our consumers. And I'm particularly troubled about the fact that the Saudis have a long track record of helping their nationals who've been accused of significant crimes in the United States get out of the country. And I think, as the FBI said in an open report to me there ought to be some consequences when the Saudis do that, and I'm particularly concerned about this because Fallon Smart, a young woman who had her life ahead of her and lives very close to us, or lived in an accident that was close to our home, she had her life snuffed out by a Saudi national who got out of the country just before his trial.
You referenced earlier child care and how hard it can be potentially in Medford to get. Child care deserts, I believe you called it in a press release. What is being done to remedy these sorts of situations?
Well, Senator Merkley and I were able to get help for the big child care program here for their early learning services. And I'm particularly pleased to be supportive of these activities for youngsters. All the latest research shows that the neurological development for kids really focuses on 3, 4, 5 years old. And that's what these programs are really designed to do, is to help those youngsters learn, do it in a safe environment. And by the way, it's really helpful for business productivity also, because if workers can't know that their kids are safe and secure, that hurts their ability to produce in the workforce.
Senator, appreciate you taking the time. Thank you.
Let's do it again.
We'll be right back.